Well, if you want a delightful read, let me suggest that you go to Robert Sabuda's website. It is so delightful. You can learn so many wonderful details about him, about his work. And I was, looking for information to put into this intro. And so I was particularly fascinated with the details of his early life that led to this point where he is a renowned pop-up book artist. I always have to look at the title to be sure I say it all right. My favorite story on the website describes a visit to the dentist that Robert made when he was just a very young boy. He describes how terrified he was. He'd had bad experiences with dentists before. So while he and his mother sat in the waiting room, Robert says that his mother noticed a wicker basket over there that was filled with books. So now I'm quoting from the website. "My mother suggested I bring one over for us to share while we waited. I went to the basket and realized right away that these books were special. They were very thick and had hard covers, which to me meant they were expensive. I opened the first one and was shocked and delighted when something leapt right off the page. It was a pop-up book. I was so excited I forgot all about the dentist." Every dentist should think of that, right? End of the quote. From that moment on, Robert was often found cutting, pasting, and assembling scraps of paper that he found around the house. For years, he said he used stacks of old manila file folders that his mother brought home from the Ford Motor Company where she worked. Art remained his passion throughout his school years, and after high school, he attended the Pratt Institute in New York City. It was during an internship that he was fulfilling at Dial Books for Young Readers that he realized he wanted to be a children's book illustrator. In much of his early work, he created two-dimensional cut paper collage and paper mosaic. And then in the early 1990s, he began to work with paper in 3 dimensions. He acknowledges that he is completely self-taught in regard to pop-ups. So, any budding pop-up book artists out there, you're going to learn some good things today. When I looked through Robert's bibliography, I counted 39 titles. The first 10 that were published between 1988 and 1994 are labeled picture books only. But since 1994, he has published 24 pop-up books. Many of them focus on Christmas, which happens to be my favorite holiday. And he admits that because he grew up in snowy rural Michigan, Christmas was also his favorite holiday. My own collection of Robert's books started one Christmas when a dear friend of mine gave me a copy of Robert's first pop-up, The Christmas Alphabet. I still put that out every Christmas and let the kids look at it with me. My friend Ann Montanaro Staples, who is here with us today, has spoken of Robert so often that I feel like I already know him, but we just met 5 minutes ago. And so I'm really looking forward to getting better acquainted with him through this lecture, which is titled Robert Sabuda, Travels Through Time and Space. Please join me in welcoming our special guest, Mr. Robert Sabuda.
Wow. Thank you very much for inviting me here to Salt Lake City, which doesn't look anything like New York City, I'm happy to say. When I travel and do presentations, I like to sort of give a big view of what it is that I do. And not only that, but where I've come from and the people who have come before me. The pop-up books that we see today are usually things that we see in libraries or gifts or special collections. But there have been many paper engineers who've made pop-ups or movable books that have come before me. So I do like to talk about them a little bit before I get to my own work. So, titled A Brief History. Movable books, as they were traditionally called, books that had movable parts in them made out of paper. The first known movable book is from 1250. This is Matthew Paris's Chronica Majorica. Matthew was a Benedictine monk, and his book was the first that we know of that had flaps in it. Flaps or other paper elements that moved. The purpose of the flaps in this particular book were to allow the monks to envision taking journeys, spiritual journeys away from where they lived or to the Holy Land. It allowed their imaginations to go beyond what they were just seeing on the page. This is actually the first known paper movable in Western history. This is called a volvel. It's from the French word, which is to push. These books are very large that the monks had. They're enormous. They're this big and very thick, and they're very heavy. They weigh about 20 pounds. And the monks would need to do calculations when the holidays were, when to pray, when to do this, when to do that. And the pages had diagrams like this on them, but the books were too heavy to turn on the monk's lap. So Matthew decided, instead of turning the book, why doesn't the dial just turn? So he began to cut out these dials and attach them to the paper, and then the monks could just spin the paper around to make their calculations. Most early movable books like this are not meant for children, they're for adults, and they are teaching tools. This book here has also volvels on it as well. I want to see if I can see my little, oh wait, sorry. I want to get to view show. All right, there we go. Has volvels on it as well. This is from about 1560 on it. The volvels were wonderful because not only could you do astronomical calculations, if you were looking up at the heavens and you wanted to know when Venus was going to be here or when Saturn would appear, you would be able to turn the discs and it would calculate in advance into the future when those things would occur. At this time, this book is from about 1530. This is Astronomica Caesarium. This is one of the most famous movable books, Astronomica, the sky, Caesarium for the king. This is actually a book for royalty, a very, very big, intricately hand-painted book that has volvels in it. The volvels are attached with string. They're very colorful, and again, to make calculations. Because at this time in history, it wasn't just astronomy, learning about the stars. Astronomy and astrology were intermingled very, very tightly. So the stars not only moved and did things, but they could forecast the future and tell you when to go to war, or when to get married, or when to have kids, or all these different things. This is the Little Book of the Sphere. These books became very, very popular, but they were very expensive. Books were very expensive in the 15th and 16th, even in the 17th and 18th century. So scholars were interested, young students were interested in having these books as well for calculations. So the books started to be produced in smaller versions. This particular book from 1540 is the Little Book of the Sphere, and it's meant to fit in a pocket or into a pouch. Most books, like I said, were very heavy and couldn't be carried around, but this one you could carry around and have discussions with it and make calculations. So these books were really tools, teaching tools, learning tools. The volvels also became the first make-it-yourself books. You didn't go into a bookstore. There weren't bookstores. You went to the printers, and the printer would sell you books that the printer was printing. But if you wanted a volvel in your book, you would get the book, and the plates were already printed on it, and you would have to cut it out. So you would have to find out where all the different wheels go, and you'd have to cut them out and string it through and knot it, and then you could make your own calculations and hope that you had all the volvels in the right order, or your calculations would be terrible. Again, this is an illustrated book that has little engravings of the zodiac symbols around it. So the books became a bit of fortune telling started to really come into play. People would go around and say, well, I can tell you, what's going to happen in your life, if it's going to be good or if it's going to be bad based on what's occurring. So volvels lasted for hundreds of years. You can even see volvels in artist books today. But continuing the vein of teaching, for those of you any of you who are anatomy students or have anything to do with medicine, of course, during the 15th, 16th, 17th century, it was really forbidden to perform autopsies. That was really frowned upon in many religious states. So books began to be produced that would allow students and instructors to share the workings of the body by using flaps. So many books would have layers that you would lift up, and you could see how musculature worked, or the skeleton, how that worked. And oftentimes, most of the books also showed pregnancy, which was one of the most magical things in the world, and would allow people to understand where the baby was and how it was situated and why it looked that way. Perspective then came to be an important part of learning about architecture. As the importance of architecture increased in contemporary history, the idea that perspective was going to be important in planning and building, and everything became more than just calculations for what was going to happen, but calculations of what we wanted to make now. So many books started to have movable plates in it, things that would spin. These are 2 floor plans that reveal what happens underneath. This book is from 1660. This is a 1660 title. And this is an image of how we take perspective for granted now. I'm standing up here at the podium. I see the perspective of the table behind me. I see the sort of strange perspective of the room. I see the perspective of all the chairs leading to a vanishing point behind me. This is taken for granted today in the 20th and 21st century, but hundreds of years ago, people did not understand what perspective was at all. So they would have machines that would allow them to do that. I have a pointer here, right here. Here's my pointer. This is just a basic perspective machine that would allow you, the artist would sit on this side, and there'd be a window right here, and it would have lines on it, and the artist would have a piece of paper that would also have corresponding lines on it. The artist would look through one particular square, and whatever he saw, wherever it was appearing on this woman, he would draw the exact thing on the piece of paper. So by trial and error, the idea of perspective became understood. So perspective begins to appear in movable books. Books begin to appear that actually have the machine, they call it a machine, we would not call it a machine today, at the top. So this is a very small, this book is from 1664, a very small paper window at the top, and a very strange, stretched kind of etching at the bottom. When you lift the flap and look through the square hole, the perspective of a man's face shrinks and works in perfect perspective. So you understand how vanishing points work, perspective. These were all very, very important parts of people becoming good architects and artists as well. I include this Volvel here because the artwork on it is fantastic. It's a picture of the moon, and by turning it, the different phases of the moon, you can make calculations on this as well. Most Volvels and most of the machine pieces in themselves, the paper pieces, were not illustrated very illustriously, but I like this one of the moon because it shows all the different canyons and the valleys, a very early picture of what the moon would be looking like. This is what I consider to be, and if somebody ever comes up with something early, that would be great, the first actual pop-up book. This is in my collection. This is from 1777, and it's British. It is also a perspective book. It's meant to teach students. The author was an art teacher. These are paper mechanisms right here that lay flat in the book, and here's a black string. The paper mechanism lays flat against the page, and when you pull the black string, the mechanism stands up. So you can understand how the lines, and it's got string on the inside, so you can understand how lines of perspective work again. You can see it on the top and strings on the inside. This, of course, would have to be hand-assembled before it could be published. There are 300 copies of this book published. This is only the second one I've ever seen in existence. Children's books. Children's publishing really came to a head in the late 1700s. Before that, children's books, really, they didn't exist that much. If you were a child, you were, for the most part, just meant to be dealt with on a daily basis as if you were another burden that were meant to be fed, or to get out there and do the work. Not a lot of thought was really went into thinking that your child could rise to a greater place than you had risen. So children's books were not very effective, not very interesting, not published that much until the late 1700s. In the late 1700s, printing became faster. The British really took off and decided that there was a market for books for children that would entertain children and tell them interesting stories and things like Aesop's Fable, so they could learn morals from somebody who was not just the preacher in a church. They could read a book and then contemplate, the pictures of the story in it. This is the first movable books for children were called harlequinades or turn-up books. This is from my collection. It's the Woodman's Hut, and this is from about 1800. It's undated, but it's about 1800. And it's printed traditionally with lithography, and then it's hand-painted, it's hand-watercolored. The way a turn-up book goes is, it tells a story. There's flaps here and flaps here. You open it up, and it tells you what's going on in this page. And then on the other side of this is an illustration, and you flip it down, it tells you the next page. And then there's something on the other side of this, and you lift this up. So it's a series of engagings and openings and an effort to bring the reader into the story. This particular story is, and it's beautifully illustrated. The color's great, everybody's very dramatic. This story is typical. It's about a boy who meets a girl, and then he loses the girl, and then he gets her back, and then everything ends up in an engulfing fire, and everybody dies. So there were just, this is what you want to teach your children in the early 1800s. Be good, or you're just going to burn, burn, burn. But harlequinades were crazy successful. They were, you could get them in black and white and they'd be cheaper. You get the hand-painted ones and they were more expensive. They were a big hit in Britain in the late 1700s. So all those trends would transfer from Great Britain over to the United States because this is an American title. Yeah, there's the big fire down there at the end. This is from 1825. This is a little, boy, I picked this up about 15 years ago. It's a small box of movable cards. I'm interested in pop-up books, not just from an educational point of view and an artistic point of view. I'm interested in pop-up movable books from a fun view, I guess. And this is one of the funnest, earliest things I have in my collection. And it's entertainment. In the early 1800s, this is from 1825, actually February 3rd, 1825. Mimical Ladies and Gentlemen. It's a little boxed set. It's about the size of playing cards, and it comes in this lovely case, and you pull this little box out by this yellow ribbon, and inside are cards. And the cards have caricatures on them, various different kinds of faces. There's no instructions in the box. I don't know if these were important historical figures or who these people are on the inside. And on the back, this is one of my favorite ones, on the back of each card is a tab. And when you move the tab back and forth, the person looks like they're snoring. So you'd be sitting around in your very Jane Austen house or whatever going, oh, ha, 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 tea. And this would be the fun thing that you would be doing before television. And it's fun. They're great cards. They're hilarious. And again, they're hand-painted, printed with lithography, and then hand-painted with watercolor. Peep shows or tunnel books also became very popular in the early 1800s. Before the 1800s, tunnel books, what's a tunnel book? It's a big wooden box, and there'd be wooden slats in it, almost like scenery in a stage, like scenes come out from the side. And they'd be religious scenes, and some guy would travel around with this big wooden box with these scenes, and you'd pay a penny, and you'd look through the hole, and you'd see, the nativity or some big battle or something that happened in the Bible. And that started to transform to paper. So people started to make peep shows in paper. So it would be the same thing. The whole thing would fold up. There'd be a hole at the front. This is, I think this is Don Quixote this is about 1830. There's a hole at the front, and when you pull it back, you see all these scenes in 3 dimensions. So now the movable books begin to have a greater sense of depth. There's the idea that it's not just a surface, not necessarily that just moves, but there can be depth to this entertainment in this book that we're seeing. This is Robinson Crusoe. This is from 1860. This is from a publisher called Dean & Son, and they really revolutionized the world of children's movable and pop-up publishing, and they are credited with actually creating the first pop-ups for children because these scenes are 3-dimensional. This whole scene of Robinson Crusoe here, this is the French edition actually, lays down flat, has a ribbon on the back. When you lift the ribbon up, the whole scene stands up. So this must have been just like an amazing thing. And this is certainly not something you would see in the average person's home. This was in somebody's home who was very wealthy, because this would definitely be a wealthy kind of plaything for a child. On the Showman series, this is one of my favorite books. This is from the 1870s. It's big. I love big pop-ups, as I'm sure most of you know from my books. This is a huge, huge pop-up, and you have to lift these. I equate a lot of pop-up books and pop-up making with theater, because it is theater. I mean, this looks like a little miniature theater as I'm lifting up the top of this. So I lift the roof up. This is a side view. It stands up in 3 dimensions. It's got text at the bottom, which frankly to me is neither here nor there, because the entertainment, the artistic value of the pop-up itself is so spectacular. This is probably printed in Germany, and let's see if I can do it back. I'll zoom in here, and you pull a tab, and it rocks this little baby's chair right here. So now there's incorporation of movement in the 3-dimensional world. We've got all the scene happening here, but now the reader, the viewer, is being asked to actually be interactive with it. So pull on something, and something will occur. This is autumn. It's the 4 seasons, and you pull on this little tab here. Wait, go back, and they rock on the chairs. And yes, the artwork is very, of its period, very saccharine, and these children, everything looks perfect and everybody's beautifully dressed, but who cares? It's awesome. This is summertime. I like this one because there's these two little girls are sort of leaning in for a kiss here, leaning in for a secret when you pull the tab. One of the most famous paper engineers in the history of pop-up and movable books is Lothar Meggendorfer. There's actually an award named after him today, given out for the best paper engineer book of the year. And Lothar Meggendorfer, his last name obviously is German. Some of the best pop-up books came out of Germany because they were printed in Germany. The Germans were exquisite printmakers. Lothar Meggendorfer is one of the best in the world, I think. Why? Why is he the best? Wait, let's back up. Okay, so these kids don't even look real. You know what I mean? They look like they're so perfect, they look like they're Barbie dolls. The kids all look perfect, and everything in the scene is perfect. Their clothes are perfect, the birds, the trees, the weather, everything is perfect in this particular book. Lothar Meggendorfer was willing to sort of step outside that box and let people do crazy things. This is about a boy and his manservant out on a picnic. And he was never afraid to just let silly people do kind of silly things. And I zoom in for this. So he's got this sort of dorky manservant here. And that was never seen before. And you can see the mouth closing. The mouth moves. There's so much movement in each one of these pieces. The man leans forward. The crocodile's mouth opens. The man leans down. His eye moves. The binoculars go up. It's just movement after movement after movement, all with one pull. Just pulling one tab all the way out. And how was this accomplished? In this close-up, these are very small copper rivets, tiny copper rivets. There's one over here on the crocodile. So they're all connected on the back by one tab. And there's a little rivet here. So it's literally like a machine. It's like a moving machine. You pull the back and the things rivet and turn and move around. And it's the most extraordinary thing I've ever seen in pull tabs. In fact, it was so popular, those are from the late 1800s, that a reproduction of his work was made in the late 1980s. And this is a reproduction of Meggendorfer's work. You pull the tabs, things move. But what I like about this book is on the last page, it shows you how that mechanism works. This is the front side, and they use plastic rivets here, here, and here, all these plastic rivets. But if you turn it over, you can see all the rivets here again. So with one pull of this tab, all these different pieces would move. It's just an amazing feat of paper engineering, and Meggendorfer's books are extremely valuable. I only have one. This is by Ernest Nister at the turn of the century. This is about 1890, 1900. Ernest Nister invented the revolving wheel. There's a little ribbon down here, and when you turn the ribbon up and bring it all the way down, these are changing pictures, you get a whole new scene. So that had never been done before, too. But again, the children are very, I hate to use the word angelic, but everybody looks angelic. Everybody's perfect. Nobody's fighting or pulling out anyone's hair. It's not as interesting as I think it could be. This is one of my favorite movable books. Technically, it's not a movable book, but it has moving parts in it, to me, that are extraordinary. This is the Speaking Picture book. This is my copy. It's from 1897, I think. Running alongside of the Speaking Picture book are these ivory handles. These are actually made out of ivory. And you open the Speaking Picture book, and it's got a story, and it tells you about the cock, this rooster, and the story and everything. And you pull this little ivory handle, and you pull the string, and it goes on the inside. It's amazing. There's screen down here at the front so the sound can come through. This is hand-painted in gilded wood. This is the inside of the Speaking Picture book. There's miniature bellows on the, a bellow, like to make the fire get stoked. And so air rushes through these bellows into all these different whistles to make all these different noises. Like there's a cow that goes moo when you pull one of the strings on it. It's amazing to me that it still makes sound after 100 years. It's one of the best, interesting kind of interactive books. So we turn into the 1900s. With the beginning of World War I, the German and the European markets really stopped working together because of the war, and paper became very expensive. So there was definitely a slowdown, an almost stopping of movable books from about 1910 to 1920. But a few titles were still put out. This is Philip's popular Mannequin, and My father has a mustache just like that to this day. He has a big handlebar mustache. That's one of the reasons why I got this, because it looks like my dad. And Philip's Popular Mannequin, again, throws all the way back to those teaching books about anatomy and allowing students to understand the inner workings. This is actually a very elaborate book. Musculature, the nervous system, the skeletal system, everything all the way down to the lungs, the heart, everything underneath it. One of the reasons why I also got this book is it is really a sign of the times, because if I back up here, and I'm sure this is okay for me to say this here, but you'll notice that Mr. Phillips is missing something. There's a part of Mr. Phillips' anatomy that just doesn't seem to exist. So I recently got a female version of Philip's Popular Mannequin, and when you, I don't have it here, but when you open the first page, you don't even get to see this. Mrs. Phillips has a white piece of paper over here to prepare you that you're going to pull it back and she's going to be naked underneath it. 1929 to about 1940, 45, my dates they're kind of fast and loose, but that's all right. Baccano Stories was published. Baccano's was huge. It was thick. It had tales of, adventure and enchanted places and just any place you would want to go if you were a child in the United States in the Depression and everything was terrible. If you could see Baccano, it would definitely lift your spirits. The Baccanos, great illustrations, wonderful stories, a lot of text. If you were your own reader, you could go and sit and do this on your own and get through the stories. But the Baccanos had between 5 and 6 spectacular pop-ups interwoven throughout the book. The Baccano books are really I consider them to be the first true pop-up books for young readers, because the pop-ups are visible from 360 degrees. You can turn the book all the way around and you can still see art and activity and things going on behind it. The Baccanos ran for decades and were very, very popular. Some better than others. The artwork's sometimes good, sometimes the artwork is not good, but they're still wonderful, wonderful titles. This is the Haggadah, so religion and faith started to become parts of books. If this little tab, I don't have the other one with me, but you pull this little tab right here, there's a little tab right there down the bottom, and there are the Pharaoh's men, and they all get washed away. So you pull a tab and out they go. The Jolly Jump Ups, this is a baby boomer title. My mother actually had Jolly Jump Ups. The Jolly Jump Ups were different in the fact that they were meant to be read. They weren't open like a traditional book. You would open a traditional book this way, which is horizontal. You open the Jolly Jump Ups vertically. You open them vertically like Dean and Sons' old books. And these books are from the early 40s into the 50s, and they really show a very idealized view of American life during World War II. They're not very diverse, but the artwork is beautiful on them. This is one of the few known women who worked in pop-up books. This artwork is by Geraldine Klein, and her husband did some of the paper engineering as well, but I'd like to think that Geraldine did a bit of the paper engineering too. What's so great about the Jolly Jump Ups is because they were produced often during wartime, they're made from only one piece of paper. If you open up one of my pop-up books, or even one of the pop-up books from the 1860s, there are many different pieces of paper all glued in by hand. The Jolly Jump Ups are all made from just one single piece, cut and folded at strategic locations. So it's fun, and it looks like pictures of when my mother was a girl in her bathing cap, and I love it. This is my real introduction into pop-up books as a young person. This is Sleeping Beauty by Wojciech Kubaszta. Kubaszta is a legend in the pop-up book world. He lived in Czechoslovakia. He's a Czechoslovakian artist, and when the Cold War was going on, his works were kind of, sort of snuck out a little bit behind the door to a London publisher so they could reach the American markets. And Kubaszta really set the standard for illustration in general in pop-up books. No pop-up books before him had been, I feel, this beautifully illustrated. Pop-up books are not just about the movement and the 3 dimensions and the mechanisms, it's about the artwork that complements those things. And Kubaszta really understood this, I feel like nobody had before him. He also had a terrific sense of humor. His paper engineering, again, is very sparse, often just made from one piece of paper with strategic folds and a few pieces glued in. but a wonderful sense of humor. And I remember the first pop-up book after that dentist trip I got a birthday, for my birthday, I got a copy of Kibosh's Cinderella. And this is like in, I don't know, 1970, 69 or something, and I was fascinated by it. It was just, there was such quiet, delicate loveliness in it that, this said it all. This is one pull tab and one change, and that just speaks volumes. You don't have to have words for something like that. It just knows that you're going to see something great, and this is what his work was. This is from the Tin Soldier. This is one of my favorite pull tabs from the Tin Soldier. And it's just the head. It's just, this is actually, you pull this fin over here. Wait, okay, so you pull the fin, you see the fin will start to go out, but just this comes down, and it just, again, you don't even need the text. The expression on his face. Look at the Tin Man's face. Oh, that's great. So I started to collect, and people would give me more pop-up books, and Hallmark started. This is a Hallmark pop-up book. Hallmark greeting card company used to produce a lot of pop-up books, and they were terrific. All kinds of illustrators, subject matter, but this is one of their best, I think. When astronauts walked on the moon, they had a lunar lander. We think today about, you can just go out and buy toys or models of action figures or spaceships or whatever. This is made out of paper. This is a lunar lander inside a book made out of paper. That, to me, was just incredible. And I remember this piece of wire from this small piece of the aircraft here, thinking, oh, you can put wire in a book, and you can put something on it, and it'll pop up. It'll be even better. The young paper engineer that I was, like, my heart was like in palpitations. This is Jan Pankowski's Haunted House from 1979. This won the Kate Greenaway Award, which is the award for the best children's book of the year in the United Kingdom. This won that in 1979. So Haunted House also, this was the first time that librarians, I'm generalizing, librarians really began to take a bigger look at pop-up and movable books as well. And Haunted House was the start of that. It's a great volume. The humor is really fun. The paper engineering is terrific. The illustration is great in it. The words are simple to read. A reluctant reader would love a book like this. And I really like Haunted House because at the very end, it also has a sound effect 100 years after the speaking picture book. This saw starts to saw itself. As you open the page, it makes a noise like it's sawing itself out of the box. So those little touches, maybe we as adults would not know, but when you're young, you notice all those things. You see all those details. Haunted House was followed up by Robot. More fun, more laughs. This is about 1980. Great rocket ship taking off. If you're a young reader and you're like pulling up and a rocket ship goes up, that's amazing. That's the best thing. And what I think is one of the best pull tabs in the history of pull tabs, this robot father, this weightlifting robot father, starts to lift up this weight over his head, and he realizes his pants are falling down at the same time, and he brings down the weight to cover up his boxer shorts. That, just from one pull tab. That's the best. Followed by The Human Body in 1982, I think 82. This is a spectacular book. Shows the anatomy is wonderful. The constructions are great. My mother loves this book because she lives in Michigan, and if she has a pain, and I don't know what she's talking about, she says, get the book, and I'll point and go to that page, and she points where the page is, so I know where the pain is. And in 1983, The Facts of Life. That education, thread continues to run through movable books. And which, as far as I know, shows the only pop-up penis in publication, and that's the only one I've ever seen. The Dwindling Party by Edward Gorey. The macabre tale of this family that disappears one by one. So dark humor starts to become a part of pop-up books. They don't all have to be cute. They don't all have to be wonderful. This is The Dwindling Party, also by one of my favorite illustrators, Edward Gorey. Again, it's a peep show tunnel book. You look through the hole at the front, and you can see the underbelly, the seedy underbelly of London. Elvis, of course. What would we do without him? Another classic. I wonder if they'll do a new one. Wouldn't it be great if they had a new one? This is great. You pull on these tabs down here, and everybody does this. Yay! They give you the royal wave. And when you pull this tab, they lean in and kiss each other. This paper engineer is Victor White, and he was one of the best paper engineers of the 1970s and 80s. And of course, where else but in Hollywood? that's got to be there. That's my favorite King Kong. Could you get a piano to play as time goes by? And this actually has a sound chip in it that plays as time goes by. Indeed. Da-da. Look at that shirt. Look at that collar on that shirt. My parents were kind of hippies, so I'm sure my mother made that shirt for me in Michigan. I have always been an artist, always. I don't really come from an artistic family, but I don't recall a time when I wasn't drawing or painting or making something. And I've had my elementary school teachers come to my book signings, and I have asked them, because you don't remember what you were like when you were a kid, unless it was a terrible event. You don't know what you were like when you were 7. What were you like? What were you like when you were 5? So I've asked my elementary school teachers, what was I like when I was this old? And they said, you knew that you were going to be an artist. We would give you a project to do, and you would just go over and do it, and you didn't need any help. And I'm like that kind of today, and I was so glad to hear that, because those teachers, them letting me do what I wanted was one of the most important things for me as a young artist. Them recognizing that ability in me and encouraging that ability made me become the artist that I am today. This is a diorama that I made. Who knows why I made this? Obviously, I like to work in 3D. I think I made this when I was like 7 or 8. My desire to work in 3 dimensions began also at a young age. I liked making models, and I liked making small things and writing on things and little just there was something about that intricacy which appealed to me, which became a part of who I am as a paper engineer today. My spelling wasn't so great. That I and E thing, I still can't get that. I lost School B when I was, I don't even know what grade, 2nd or 3rd grade, because I couldn't spell receive properly, and I never forgot that I and that E thing. So this is the only pop-up I have remaining from my childhood, because my parents were kind of, my parents were kind of hippies. I mean, they were great, but they were hippies. I grew up in Michigan. They were hippies, and they were like, it's beautiful, remember it in our hearts, man. And then it would just disappear. So I don't know where all my artwork is. Every now and then something will surface magically. The only reason I even have this pop-up is because I've had this about 5 years now. I made it for a friend, and she actually sent it back to me. And she said, I thought you would enjoy having this after me enjoying it all these years. And I was so grateful, because this is the only pop-up I have. And the fact that I used wire here is a direct response to that wire that I saw on that lunar lander in that Men in the Moon book. So I have a love of paper. Fast forwarding through my life, I became an artist. I got a scholarship to go to Pratt, because no one in my family went to Pratt. I was going to be an artist. I had a great public school education in Michigan. I fell in love with paper. I did an internship at Dial Books my junior year at Pratt, and decided I wanted to be a children's book illustrator. That was what I was going to do. And I come from a family of people who work with their hands. My father, my grandfather, and my great-grandfather are all carpenters. And my father is also a mason, a retired mason. So I come from a lineage of people who craft and make things with their hands. So when I started illustrating children's books, traditional picture books, it was no surprise to me that I would also craft. I'm not really a great painter. I mean, I can draw well, but I'm not a great painter. I'm better at cutting things. This is a paper Mosaic book about Saint Valentine, the actual saint. So all those are very small cut pieces of paper that I glued down, one by one, and never doing that again. But it was the beginning of a real love and an exploration of paper and what it could do for me and what it could do on a surface. I had visited Egypt, and I decided I wanted to do a book about the boy Tutankhamun, because Tutankhamun was really only 9 when he became pharaoh of Egypt. So this book is made with cut black paper, and there's papyrus paper on the background. One of the things I learned and I loved about being at Pratt was they wanted you to experiment. Experiment with different things. Find different things that you love. There's no one thing that you need to do. Do many things and see if it satisfies you. I decided in 1992 I was going to start working in 3 dimensions, and I wasn't sure exactly how I was going to do that, and I remembered that I had loved making pop-up books, so I thought to myself, what about pop-up books? Why don't you try something like that? And because I was sort of new to pop-up books and self-taught, I was nervous about creating pop-ups that were very colorful and illustrative, because I was scared. There are times in our lives when we're scared. So I decided I would create a book, a pop-up book, my first pop-up book, Christmas Alphabet, and the pop-ups would be all white. One of the reasons for that, I guess, is because before global warming, Christmas was white in Michigan, and I was scared to draw on the pop-ups, and Also, there was something about the quietness of the white against the color that appealed to me tremendously. So I continued to work in white, and unlike many paper engineers before me, I was really interested in what the objects could look like by themselves. You know, you don't have to gild a lily. You don't. And in paper engineering, oftentimes that's the case. It's enough that 2 pieces or 3 pieces of paper can make a bird. You get it, and our minds sometimes appreciate that quiet recognition. My father is a very big animal lover, so a lot of my books had animals in them. And this is 12 Days of Christmas. This was a great book for me because it gave me the opportunity to sort of expand on, this is 5 gold rings. How do you put 5 gold rings? I could put a hand in there and put 5 gold rings on it, but that's not interesting. I try to do something interesting, so I thought, putting the 5 gold rings on the antlers, that would be something unusual. Let's see. This is the 12 ladies dancing in the music box. Oops, 12 ladies dancing in the music box at the end of 12 Days of Christmas. And that's the final spread for the 10th anniversary of 12 Days of Christmas. Santa makes an appearance, of course. More reindeer. This is one of my favorite pop-ups. People say, well, how do you get your ideas, or how do you know what book to make, or where do you... I really only make, as selfish as it sounds, I only make pop-up books that interest me or interest the child in me. Because everywhere I go, somebody gives me an idea for a pop-up book. Oh, you should do a pop-up book on Harley Davidson, someone will say to me. Harley Davidsons. And I'll be like, I live in New York City, I don't even know how to drive a car. So I'm not going to be making a pop-up book on Harley Davidsons. I have to do something that's interesting to me, or that at a bare minimum appeals to the child in me that I was when I first came across pop-up books. This book is filled with animals. This is really, my father would take me out in the wintertime and show me how to track animals, and the time we spent together, it was really a great period of my life in Michigan. And so these kind of scenes and themes appear many times throughout my books. And this pop-up actually has some electronics, and you pull this little tab at the bottom, and there's Christmas lights on each side of that house that light up. So I try to learn new things, I want to learn how electronics work. And this book, America the Beautiful, this came out of, I was asked to make some, there was a famous TV on television, a famous TV show about a woman who baked, and she did all these awesome things, and you could make everything, and it's a good thing. So you know what I'm talking about. And one Christmas, they were going to go around the world, and they wanted to just have all these big pop-up books made. These big pop-ups made of all these places, like Germany and Mexico and Poland. So her company asked me to make these huge pop-ups, like 4x4, and then they used a crane to open them, and the pop-ups came up, and then she did something bad, and she went to prison, and then she got out of prison, and so I decided that I would use those ideas. My editor said, wouldn't it be great to use those pop-ups for like a book, something like that? And I was like, oh, that's a great idea. And I've traveled the United States from end to end, north to south, east to west. And so America the Beautiful seemed like the perfect thing to do. I stood at the edge of the Mississippi River. If you've never stood at the edge of the Mississippi River, you do not know what you're missing. It's one of the most powerful forces I've ever seen in my life. So I knew that I wanted to include this is from the Mississippi River. And Washington, D.C. I'm actually working on a White House pop-up book right now that'll come out 2 years from now. And white lends its own, of course, my hometown. So white lends itself to all these kinds of different architectural structures. The Wizard of Oz is my favorite book and my favorite movie. And when the centennial was coming up, the 100th anniversary in 2000, I asked my editor if I could, be a part of that and create a pop-up book for that. And she said, oh yeah, sure, let's do something. And this was the beginning of me starting to work in classic series, taking a lot of classic titles and transforming them into pop-up books. These books use the original text because I prefer not to sort of write my own text. I'm big on, if it's not broken, don't try to fix it. And some really hard mechanisms, like making the balloon open for Wizard of Oz. And of course the Emerald City. And if you wear these little glasses, there's a secret message there in the flower bed there. Kids love stuff like that. I love stuff like that. This was followed by Alice. I wanted to do Alice because all the adults, and if you've ever read Alice in Wonderland, many of you I'm sure have, the adults in Alice in Wonderland are so mean. Did you ever notice that? Everyone's so mean. And as a kid, I just thought that was the most awesome thing, that everybody was really mean. But in the end, she triumphed. So anyways, I'm digressing. This book has there's a ton of book. and the first spread of Alice. So you lift it up from under its strap, and you look down it, and Alice is falling all the way down the hole to the bottom. So there are many greats who've come before me that I've learned from, and I would never want you to think otherwise. This is Alice trying to get out of her house. She's growing too big for the house. This, I have a godson who's now 5, and when I gave him a copy of this, he was in my studio, and he was like, I don't know, 3 or whatever, and I had to go do something, and I was like, here, I'll look at this, and so he's looking through Alice, and I came back in 5 minutes later, and the roof had been torn off, everything had been torn off it. I have a lot of copies of this book, though. So all the roof had been torn off, and I was like, oh, what happened here? And he said, she couldn't get out, and I'd help her. And I'm like, oh, okay, that's totally fine. So there kind of can be an age limit, a little bit of an age limit there. This is one of the hardest pop-ups to make, this tea party. Oh my gosh. These, I sometimes, I over-design. I'm gonna talk about design in a minute real quick, but I sometimes, I set my sights very high. I know there's a famous quote, but I usually set my sights high in my books because I like good books, and if it's a book of mediocre, I don't want it. That's just how I am, I don't want it. So if I'm making a book, I want to try to make it as good as I can make it, even if other people would say, well, you don't have to do that, that's good enough. I don't really like good enough. So in this scene, Robert Sabuda had to have all these teacups be 3-dimensional. You know, I couldn't just do artwork on the table. Oh no, I had to make them be 3-dimensional. This was the most difficult pop-up in this entire book, is getting these stupid teacups to stand up. And my designers who worked for me, they told me that that was the expression I had on my face the whole time I was trying to design this. Yeesh. And then the flurry of cards at the end. I include this one here because it just is a good illustration of some of the challenges that come into paper engineering. Most paper engineering, most pop-ups I make are actual objects. You're making something. You're making a house or a tree or a building. You're making a physical something. But this pop-up was very challenging because it's about motion and lightness and air. And pop-ups usually do not portray or try to portray something like that. So trying to get all these cards to look like they're just flying up in the air but still have a strong, solid structure was really very, very challenging to accomplish. But I insisted on having it done. Peter Pan, my mother was a dance teacher when I was a kid also, and she put Peter Pan on. We did it as a recital, and I was John and wore the glasses. So I knew that I'd like to illustrate Peter Pan. This is a view down of London, looking down from the clouds. You can see some of the characters are starting to appear here. There's a mermaid down there, just to give a hint of what's to come. The Boys Island, and we've got a ship. Love ships and pop-up books. And Peter Pan at the end, and Tinkerbell flies out. As you open this page, Tinkerbell flies out from that side. Okay, design. How do I do this? I have no idea. I'm making it all up as I go along. My studio is in New York City, and believe it, I do work on a computer, but the bulk of what I do is old school. Old school. Scissors, glue, tape, triangle, which I only use this as a straight edge. I don't even know how to use that, I don't even know how to use a protractor. Remember protractor? Some of you, like you young people, protractor, what's that? But it's like this complicated roundy thing. I don't know how to do any of that. I don't know any of that stuff. And this is one of the most important tools I use. Anybody know what this is? A knitting needle, yeah. I use a knitting needle here to score the paper. I use lots of knitting needles. They make perfect scores when I need to make a score to fold the paper. This is a preliminary construction for an owl from the Chronicles of Narnia. So when I'm designing, I jump right in. I have a picture in my mind's eye of what I want it to be in general. I never draw in 2 dimensions. I just start cutting and folding. So this is a very beat up, taped up. The shapes are very basic here. I'm only concerned with, does it look like what it's supposed to look like, and does it close when I shut it? Those are the only concerns. And then I'll keep moving forward, and I'll make better versions of it. So the first one didn't have eyes or a lot of feathers or anything or details. I'll continue to just improve on it and make sure that things are properly constructed and hitting at the right angle, and does it close and does it open. And sometimes I can make up to almost a dozen of these prototypes until just the white pop-up is working all by itself. This is for a horse and a rider. Sometimes I'll sketch, like, is the head gonna go down, or how's this leg gonna work, or, you know, nothing is a given. There's no set rules. I'm trying with my knowledge to come up with something that works. That's the bottom line. It is trial and error. And then there's like a fifth leg in here, and what's that? I don't know what that is. Sometimes the pop-ups don't even work, and I give up. I'll just put it aside and say, this one doesn't work. I have to do something else because this is not going to happen. So the horse does start to happen. I'm able to start to get the limbs to work on there, and this is a little complicated here. There's a rider. There's obviously this very time-consuming, beautifully detailed tail here, which is cut out of 4 cuts. The key thing is to get the basic components moving back and forth. Start to work on the horse's head, and I decide I'll have a little rein here for string because I do like to use elements other than paper in my book. Continue to refine. Tail gets better. The boy gets more refined. The arms, the anatomy, the limbs, everything. Each one that I make has to be better than the one before in terms of design and construction. After I know that the whole thing works, that whole horse works now, I take it apart and I make tracings of each piece onto tracing paper. These are my traces. I scan them into the computer. I scan those tracings into the computer, and then I use Adobe Illustrator, and I make digital outlines of every single pop-up piece. Every pop-up and every book has to have its own digital drawing of its piece. These pieces are then printed out, cut out, and then I can assemble them to make sure that everything's working. Everything gets a number on it. Because of the pop-up book, there can be 200 to 300 pieces. I need to be able to know at a moment's notice what piece that is and where that goes. The boy is also put on top to make sure he's working well with the horse. I start to sketch also as the pieces are finished, what is the horse's expression going to be? What will the eye look like? The nose, the mouth. Does the string hole fitting in the proper area? All these details have to be addressed as I'm moving along. And then I'm checking to make sure my digital drawing fits onto the actual drawing for the artwork that's going to be made. Start to sketch in black and white. Get to color. Make sure it's still fitting onto the die lines. Print everything out in color. Assemble it. And the working horse is there. So this is a very time-consuming, long project to make sure that everything functions properly. Surface art. My white pop-up books obviously don't have any art on them at all, but many of my other books do. When I was first starting as a children's book illustrator, I was a printmaker. I printed on blocks of linoleum. So these are some of the tools that I used when I was a printer: ink, sharp tools, rollers. This is how you make a linoleum block print. All the artwork for The Wonderful Wizard of Oz was created by linoleum block prints. So I would sketch out, this is the Wicked Witch of the West. She has an eye patch. She has a bionic eye that lets her see really far. I would transfer this drawing onto a block of linoleum and then carefully begin to cut away all the edges, all the outsides of the part that won't print. None of this is going to print. Roll ink across it. Press paper onto it, rub it around, and then very carefully pull off the paper. So I don't use this technique for all my books, but for The Wizard of Oz, it seemed appropriate. So every single piece of artwork in The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, the black and white, is created using cut blocks of linoleum. Other books require other techniques. This is Beauty and the Beast. When I've returned to my love of paper, this actually shows several things. This is the pencil dummy. I do a rough drawing pencil dummy to give the publisher for Beauty and the Beast. And then I go to a more finished drawing. And you can see my changes. I didn't like this hat so much up here that she had on. So now she just has this. And the sisters are very generic. Now they're getting personalities. So this is the final drawing for the sisters that I want. And I've decided for this book to use cut black paper. And you can see down here that I'm starting to cut out the negative areas away. So all the artwork for Beauty and the Beast is made from, the black and white is made from cut paper. I work in reverse and I cut everything out. Color for Beauty and the Beast is added with collage paper. I make all these pieces of paper and then I cut out each individual area that I like. If I like this green, obviously I like that green for something, or I like the big section. I cut out the paper. I make all different kinds of paper washes and stamps and reds and blues and any color. There's marbleized paper back here. Marbleized paper. Cut out those pieces and apply it underneath the black and white cut paper. So I have all cut paper to make my artwork for this. Told you I was a crafter. I'm like Joe Crafter guy. And the finished jacket for Beauty and the Beast. This is how I didn't make all those pop-up books by myself, by my own hands. How are pop-up books made? This is in China. Pop-up books used to be made in Ecuador and South America for, I don't know, 20, 30 years. And the business took a downturn, and so now it goes to China. I go to see the production of all my pop-up books, or someone else from my studio. I have 2 designers. They go to see it, the production. This is really the printing area of this plant that manufactures pop-up books. They print all the sheets like they would a newspaper or magazine. All the pop-ups are on one big piece of paper. This is for cookie count. They check the color to make sure the color is good. And it looks like roadkill. We call this pop-up roadkill because you can't tell what all the pieces are, but those are all the pieces that will be needed to create one pop-up book. The digital die lines, those pink die lines, those digital die lines, are sent down to China, transferred to a block of wood, and then they use I have a little video clip of this after. Then they cut through this block of wood to begin to make the die mold, because they're not going to cut all those pieces out by hand. They're actually going to use a mold, a press down like a big cookie cutter to cut out all the pop-up pieces. So the machine, like a little jigsaw, cuts through all the blocks of wood very carefully along the die lines. Then it goes into the actual die room. They take thin strips of metal, and there's a die block back there, and very carefully pound the metal back and forth to get it to curve, because they want it to curve into the shape of whatever the pop-up is I have. And once they've got that curved, they pound it, they use all these different tools to shape it, and then they pound it into the block of wood. So this is a very sharp side of the die mold that will be used to cut out the pop-up pieces on a press. They put white foam around all of the metal areas so that the paper will spring back off the press. The paper one at a time will press down and spring off. So everything gets covered with foam. The die mold lasts for 100,000 impressions, then they have to make a new one. So it only lasts for 100,000. This is the reverse side, the dull side of the die mold. They put it on a press, and then it presses down one at a time onto each piece. They make all different kinds of die molds for everything you could imagine to be cut out. But the pop-up pieces don't fall out of the cut pieces of paper. They have to physically remove them. They'll use a mallet and a chisel to forcibly scrap out all the pop-up pieces for the book. So there's just tons and tons of excess leftover paper because they're making thousands and thousands of pop-up pieces and hundreds of thousands of pop-up books here. So there's all kind, and they use all this excess and they recycle it and make it into more paper. They have special tools that they use. Oh, there's all the extra. Look at all that. So this is the hand assembly room where they'll start to assemble the pop-up books. They're doing a reprint of Alice in Wonderland here. So each table is responsible for just one spread in the pop-up book. So this assembler here, all she'll do is work on this rabbit pop-up for like however many books they have to print, or her table will work just on this spread. That's so this table becomes the expert at making this particular pop-up. They use tiny brushes to apply the glue, very carefully adding the glue, gluing the pages into the tunnel book, gluing the tunnel book down to the first page, gluing all the cards in on the last spread at the end. Any electronics, there's an electronics table where they can solder in any pieces of anything that needs to be put into any of the pages. The pages themselves are glued together. Glue is also used with a squeegee. If you're a printmaker, for large areas of glue, they'll use this squeegee and they'll pull it down and glue will cover large areas. There's using the squeegee again. So if you don't want to use a brush, you can cover a lot more area of glue if you use a screen. Quality control to make sure the pop-ups work. It has to open and close. The boards for the cover are glued to the jacket and glued down on the inside. Then the whole book is glued and bound on the inside while it's drying and ready to be shipped out. I have a little teeny video clip here that hopefully is going to play right. Hand assembly video. Let's go. Yes. So this is just the printmaking machine. They'll just print, how many will they do? Oh my gosh. 50,000, 100,000, 200,000. Just a regular printing press like for a magazine. It's really loud. You can see all the pop-up pieces there. The pages are there. Everything's jammed together on one sheet of paper so you don't waste any paper. The press guy pulls it off and checks the color against the color up there to make sure it's correct. Meanwhile, they're making the dies in the die making room. So they're using that jigsaw to cut through this block of wood, very carefully following my digital die lines for each pop-up piece. Looks like a sewing machine, very carefully cutting through there. And then the thin strips of metal are pounded back and forth very carefully, very slowly to get the shape to match what's cut in the block of wood. and then he pounds that down. You can see behind there's all these other areas that we'll be cutting. This is placed on a press, and then one at a time, each page smashes against the die mold, so the pieces are cut. But they don't fall completely out. They're all still hanging in there just a little bit by a little bit of piece of paper, so they have to be removed. They're rolled into the scrapping room, and then the scrappers start to what I consider to be sort of an arduous process of removing all the excess paper, taking all the paper away without damaging, and that's really the hard thing, without damaging any of the pop-up pieces. In the assembly room, this is for actually a special MoMA commemorative card that I have coming out this year. This particular pop-up has all kinds of plastic and string in it, so she was just scrapping out all the holes. Again, tons of scrap. They'll start the assembly. This is a big ice skating scene. All the pieces are counted because they have to make sure they have the right number of pieces. So somebody has to count. Do we have enough trees? Do we have enough ice pond? Do we have enough snow? And then the assembly begins. This pop-up has string, so they use a lot of string on it. One assembler all she'll do is work on this side of the main hill, which is has the trees on both sides of it. So she'll fold it very carefully, glue it back. Sometimes they wear gloves, sometimes they don't. The preference is up to the assembler. She'll add a little bit of glue over there and then carefully fold it down. This will go much faster, but this is showing just the beginning of the process. And she carefully lines it up. So machines are not used to do any of this because when you really think about it, just looking at this, no machine would be capable of doing that complex kind of work. You physically have to have somebody's brain working to get all of this stuff together to function properly. So again, a piece is slipped into another piece, something is glued on the back, it's very carefully folded over, and then it's completed. It'll be ready for the next assembler to then start assembling it. All the big pieces are inserted into the page, the big page of the pop-up. They have tabs on the back, and the tabs are very carefully glued and folded down as well. This is one of the few hand-assembled paper things that's still made. Snowman's inserted with the kids at the front. Igloos attached, so bit by bit, the pop-up grows from just flat pieces of paper to having everything installed. The ice skaters are installed on the left side. The string is checked. They turn around because they have string wrapped around their dowels. Wrap the string around the dowels, check the string, the length, everything has to work. If one thing, here she's checking it to make sure they spin. So she get all the right proper lengths for the string and attach that to the base page. Because if one part of it doesn't work, then the whole thing doesn't work. So your job is just as important as the other person's job because the whole thing has to function. And then it's set aside for quality control. So these are finished commemoratives for the 10th anniversary. And I think there's a shot of it opening and closing too. That's the cover. There's a cover on the right. Mittens, and it has glitter. It's awesome. Oh yeah. And then it opens. Whoa, so cool. The end. That's it. Thank you. Thanks very much. But I do want to do a quick Q&A. If anyone has any questions they want to ask before I run over to the bookstore, now would be a good time to ask them. Yes? How did I meet in the people with China to make the pop-up books? Hand assembly is an industry of its own. Many things are hand assembled. And most children's books in the Western world are printed and manufactured in China because they're 4-color books. And so a smart company will decide we need to expand our business a little bit, and how can we expand our business? And the few companies have decided to move into hand assembly for books. And the person who runs this factory I've known for a long time, for about 10 years, so he knows me. So this is a new plant that they opened, so they have the skill. All I have to do is give them one that works, just one, all the digital files, and they figure out all the rest on their own. It's not too challenging to do. Any other questions anybody wants to ask? Anything else? All right, so I'm going to sign books over at the bookstore, wherever the bookstore is. And if you have a question you want to ask me, you can ask me. Did you want to? Yeah. Is it? Oh, well, this wasn't. If this was just one book, it would cost you $500. No, it's. You know what? I honestly don't know what books are there because I actually just show up and then I sit down, and so I'm not sure what books will be over there, but hopefully at least one of those books will be over there, and I wouldn't be surprised if they were. If you have a question, you can ask me over there, and if you've brought your books, you can also get them signed over there at the bookstore as well. So thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the day.